It was the kind of Christmas morning that could have been painted. The snow outside the windows fell like quiet ash, soft and endless. Every branch on the birch trees wore a crown of white, and the lake behind our childhood home shimmered beneath a layer of frozen glass. Inside, everything glowed. The fire, the string lights, even the dust in the air. The kind of warmth that photographs well. But warmth, I've learned, doesn't always mean welcome. My mother was humming carols as she set the last of the cinnamon rolls on the table. Her movements exact and careful, the way they always were when guests were around, even if the guests were just us. My father fussed with the camera tripod, recording every moment like he was documenting something holy. Caroline sat cross-legged on the rug near the tree, still in her silk pajamas, her hair brushed into perfect waves. She'd just turned 28, newly engaged, and the entire season seemed to orbit around her smile. She always knew how to hold a room, how to make people feel like they were part of something brighter just by being near her. I used to admire that, until I realized that when she shone, I disappeared. I took my usual place on the couch by the window, a little apart from the others. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't want to move. There was a comfort in staying still, in being the quiet observer while the house performed its annual play. Dad's voice broke the moment. "Okay, everyone, last gift." He turned to Caroline, smiling like the sun had come home. "This one's for you, sweetheart. From us." I remember how my mother's eyes glistened before the box was even open, as if she already knew the script. Caroline laughed softly, a little surprised, but already anticipating the spotlight. "You guys didn't have to," but she knew they did. They always did. The box was small, wrapped in gold paper with a velvet ribbon. She untied it slowly, deliberately, like she'd been trained to make every gesture elegant. I felt my stomach tighten, a quiet instinct I couldn't name yet. When the lid lifted, I caught the metallic glint before anyone else said a word, a single silver key resting on black velvet. The room froze. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my father cleared his throat and his voice softened, tender, proud. "It's the key to the lake house." The air left the room. Caroline's eyes widened. "Wait, what do you mean?" Mom touched her hand, smiling through tears. "We want you to have it, sweetheart. The house is yours now." There was a small gasp, a laugh, and then applause from Dad. He was always the first to cheer his own decisions. But I just sat there. I was 32 years old, holding an unopened mug with my name printed on it, and watching my parents hand over the only place that had ever felt like peace to me. The lake house wasn't just a building. It was where I'd hidden when their fights used to rattle the walls. It was where I'd spent nights sketching, writing, dreaming of escape. The scent of cedar and lake water was imprinted on every memory I'd ever loved. Now, they'd given it away, not just as property, but as inheritance. As blessing. Caroline laughed through happy tears covering her mouth. "You're serious?" "Oh my God, I don't know what to say." Mom brushed a tear from her cheek. "You don't have to say anything. You've earned it." Then she looked at me. "Not for long, just long enough for it to sting. You'll understand someday, Nora." The words fell like snow, quiet, soft, and heavy. I blinked. "Understand what?" Her tone was gentle, almost pitying. "You'll see when you're older." Older. I wanted to laugh. I was older. I'd built my own life, my own apartment, my own sense of independence. And yet, in this room, I was still the daughter they never quite figured out how to love properly. The one who didn't follow their script. They all went back to celebrating, wrapping their arms around each other as the fireplace crackled. I could hear Caroline's laughter ring through the house, bright and easy. I smiled when she looked my way. That's what you do when you're the quiet one. You learn how to make your silence look polite. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat on the floor by the tree. The room was dark except for the glow of the last candle flickering beside the nativity scene. The scent of cinnamon had turned stale. I could still hear Mom's words echoing in my head. "You'll understand someday." I traced the grain of the wooden floor with my fingers, remembering all the Christmas mornings before this one. The laughter, the matching pajamas, the way Dad used to call me his artist girl. Somewhere along the way, that title had shifted to Caroline's sister. I wasn't angry, not yet. Just hollow, that's what unfairness feels like sometimes. Not sharp, but dull. Like an echo that refuses to fade. I went to the window and looked out at the frozen lake. It reflected the moonlight like a mirror. I imagined Caroline walking down the dock in summer, hosting parties, taking photos, filling the space with the same noise she filled every room with, the same place that had always been my quiet. I whispered into the glass, my breath fogging it slightly. I'll understand someday. But even as I said it, I knew I wouldn't. Not the way they wanted me to. Because some things don't need understanding. They just need distance. When I turned to blow out the candle, I saw the empty mug sitting on the table beside the velvet box. Nora, it read in delicate script. I took a sip of the cold coffee inside. It was bitter, and somehow that felt right. Then I placed it down, gathered my coat, and went upstairs. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, unending, indifferent. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe the snow wasn't quiet after all. Maybe it just covered the sound of breaking hearts. A month after that Christmas morning, the snow had started to melt, but the silence hadn't. I remember standing in my apartment kitchen, watching the sunlight hit the dishes in the sink. Everything felt still, like the air had thickened since the day my parents gave away the lake house. There's something strange about quiet estrangement, the kind that doesn't explode, but drifts in slowly like fog. You stop calling first. They stop noticing. Conversations shorten until they become holiday-only exchanges. That was us, a family who'd mistaken politeness for peace. When the mail slid through the slot that morning, I didn't expect anything. Mostly bills, an ad for a credit card, and then a white envelope with my father's neat, careful handwriting. He always wrote like his words might be graded. Nora Callen, it read. Just my name. No heart, no flourish. Inside was a simple birthday card, pale blue with embossed flowers. I opened it slowly, searching for something personal. But there wasn't any handwriting this time. Just printed words, "Happy birthday, Nora. We're proud of you. Love, Mom and Dad." I traced the printed ink with my thumb. No note, no message, no apology. The card smelled faintly of perfume, my mother's, the one she only wore on Christmas and weddings. It made my chest ache. That kind of ache that doesn't hurt like a wound, but like a memory pressing too hard. That night, I placed the card on my kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. I kept hearing her voice in my head. You'll understand someday. But I didn't. I couldn't. I didn't know what there was to understand about being told, without words, that your love had conditions. A week later, my aunt called. She lived 2 towns over, the quiet kind of woman who'd always slipped me extra cookies when I was little and whispered, "Don't tell your mother." "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly. I was cleaning out some boxes in the attic. Old family things. I found something I think belongs to you. To me? There was a pause. I think so. It's a letter. From your mom. Dated years ago. She must have written it after you moved out. Something in her voice made me sit down. When I met her at the cafe 2 days later, she had that letter folded inside a plastic sleeve, like something fragile that could crumble if touched. It was tucked inside one of her recipe books, she said, sliding it across the table. Never mailed. I don't know why. The envelope was old, yellowed around the edges. My name was written in my mother's handwriting, soft, slanted, familiar. The sight of it alone made my stomach twist. I opened it carefully. The paper inside was thin, folded neatly, creased from time. The ink was slightly faded, but her words were clear. Dear Nora, you don't understand why we lean on Caroline more. Why she seems to be the one we call, the one we trust, the one who gets the parts of us you don't. It isn't favoritism. It's fear. You've always been the brave one, even when you were small. You question things, you challenge, you leave when it hurts. You remind us too much of what we gave up. Our own dreams, our own freedom, the parts of ourselves we buried when we chose this life. We don't know how to love what we can't control. Maybe one day, we'll understand you. I stopped reading halfway through. My throat tightened until I couldn't swallow. I sat there in that cafe, surrounded by strangers sipping lattes, and realized I had spent years chasing approval from people who weren't withholding it out of cruelty, but out of fear. I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I was the reflection they couldn't face. For so long, I had tried to soften myself, to be easier, quieter, more acceptable. I mistook shrinking for harmony. I thought if I could just love them right, they'd love me back the same way. But this letter changed everything. It didn't erase the hurt. It simply named it. When I looked up, my aunt was watching me carefully. I managed a small smile. "Thank you for giving this to me." She reached across the table, resting her hand over mine. "You were always more like your mother than she could admit." That night, I sat on my couch with the letter open on my lap, reading it again under the soft light of a single lamp. The words looked different the second time, less like blame, more like confession. Still, something ached. Understanding doesn't heal immediately. It just quiets the questions. By morning, I knew what I had to do. It was early February when I drove out to the lake house. The roads were slick with leftover snow, and the world around me was wrapped in fog. I hadn't been back since Christmas. The thought of stepping onto that property again made my stomach knot. When I turned down the long, winding road that led to the house, I saw it before I was ready. The wooden gate chained shut, the driveway buried under snow. A red wreath still hung on the door, bright against the gray wood. Caroline's touch, probably. Decorative, symmetrical, perfect. The lights inside were on. She was there. I could see her silhouette moving from window to window. For a moment, I almost knocked. But what would I say? Congratulations on inheriting my safe place? Instead, I sat in the car for a long time, engine running, the heater blowing against the fogged glass. I held my mother's letter in my lap. My hands shook not from anger, but from something older. The kind of trembling that comes when you're finally ready to stop pretending. I wanted to forgive them, but forgiveness is not the same as returning. Sometimes it's just the act of putting something down and walking away lighter. So I pulled out a pen, flipped the letter over, and wrote 6 words on the back. "I understand now, and I forgive you." Then I folded it neatly, placed it inside an envelope, and wrote my parents' address on the front. But instead of mailing it, I got out of the car and slipped it into the lake house mailbox. The snow was falling again, soft, endless, the way it had that morning on Christmas. The cold bit at my skin, but I didn't move right away. I stood there watching the flakes melt on the letterbox, feeling something in me unclench. When I finally turned back toward the car, I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't need to see the house anymore to know that it wasn't mine. Not the walls, not the view, not the history. What I'd needed to reclaim was smaller, quieter. It was my voice. And for the first time in years, I heard it clearly, calm, certain, whole. The letter stayed on my mind for days after that drive. It wasn't guilt that kept me awake at night anymore. It was peace, an unfamiliar kind that made me restless. When you spend most of your life fighting for someone's approval, silence feels unnatural. But silence, I was learning, could also be a sign of freedom. I stopped waiting for my phone to light up. I stopped checking if they'd seen the photo I'd posted of the sunrise that morning by the harbor. No one said anything. And for the first time, I didn't crumble because of it. I still had the copy of the lake house key they'd given me years ago. It hung on my keyring like a relic, small, heavy, cold. A reminder of belonging that never truly existed. One night, I took it off and placed it on the table. Just the sound of the metal hitting the wood made something inside me shift. It was strange, realizing that I had been holding on to a symbol of access, when what I truly wanted was autonomy. That weekend, I booked a small cottage on the northern coast. Nothing fancy. Just a place that faced the ocean and smelled like pine. The owner's note said, "There's no Wi-Fi, but you can watch the northern lights if you're patient." I smiled. That was enough. When I arrived, the air was sharp and full of salt. The cottage stood on a small hill overlooking the frozen waves. The walls were painted pale green, the kind that faded in daylight and glowed softly at dusk. I unpacked slowly, the way you do when you're not running from something, but toward yourself. That night, as the wind howled against the window, I sat by the fireplace and read my mother's letter again. Not with anger this time, but with understanding. She had loved in the only way she knew how, carefully, conditionally, protectively. But love like that doesn't grow. It traps. And for the first time, I could see the truth. She had built her family like she built her house, structured, beautiful, and afraid of change. But I was not her house to keep. I leaned back against the chair and stared into the flames until my eyes blurred. Somewhere outside, I could hear the slow rhythm of the sea, steady as a heartbeat. I realized something then. Something small but undeniable. I didn't need to go back to fix the past. I just needed to stop standing in the ruins. A few weeks later, Caroline called. It was late afternoon. The sun was low, spilling golden light across the floor. I hesitated before answering. "Hey," I said. She sounded tired, her voice thinner than I remembered. "I heard you went to the lake house." I waited. "I did. I found your note in the mailbox." Mom cried when she read it. There was a pause long enough for both of us to breathe through years of unsaid things. She wanted me to tell you that she's sorry," Caroline said softly. "She said she didn't know how much it hurt you." A long exhale escaped my lips. "Thank you for telling me." "I guess," she went on quietly, "we thought you didn't need us. You always seemed fine on your own." "I wasn't," I said, "but I learned to be." The line went quiet again, the kind of silence that doesn't demand an answer. Then, almost timidly, she said, "You know, Mom and Dad are thinking of selling the lake house." "It's too much for them now," I smiled faintly. "Maybe that's for the best." Her voice cracked just a little. "I didn't mean for things to go this way, Nora." "I know," I said, and I meant it. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just the soft decision to stop rehearsing old pain. We talked a little longer, about weather, about her new job, about how the lake had frozen completely this winter. And then we hung up, no tears, no grand reconciliation, just two sisters learning to speak without comparison. The following morning, I woke before dawn. The sky was the color of smoke, and the sea was calm. I made coffee, wrapped myself in a blanket, and stepped outside. The cold bit into my skin, but I didn't mind. The air smelled alive. In my pocket, the lake house key felt heavier than usual, as if it had one last thing to say. I walked down toward the water. The tide had pulled back, revealing a stretch of black sand dusted with frost. I stood there for a long moment, the key pressed between my fingers, remembering all the times I had waited for someone to hand me permission to belong. Then, quietly, I opened my hand. The key glinted once in the pale light before it fell. A small, silver sound swallowed by the sea. It didn't feel like losing something. It felt like being released. The horizon began to change colors, violet, then blue, then gold. And in that light, I understood what my mother had meant all those years ago when she said, "You'll understand someday." Maybe she was wrong about what I'd understand, but right that I would, eventually. Because now I did. I understood that love doesn't need to come with proof. That being left out doesn't mean being unloved. It means being free to love differently. And that freedom, quiet, tender, unannounced, was mine now. Later that evening, as I packed to leave the cottage, I noticed a small guest book by the fireplace. Pages filled with names, dates, and small messages from strangers who had come here to escape something too. I flipped to the last page and picked up the pen. My handwriting looked steady as I wrote, "Came here lost. Leaving lighter. Sometimes family doesn't come back to you. You come back to yourself." Nora Callen and I closed the book and set it gently back on the shelf. Outside, the first snow of the season had started to fall again. Soft, unhurried, beautiful. I stood there by the window, watching it settle against the glass, feeling the warmth from the fire at my back. And in that moment, I knew. I didn't need a key to any house. I already had one, to my own peace. The world outside was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore.